to talk to you. And can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's all good. Can hear you clearly.
I'm calling in using the GoToMeeting app on my mobile phone.
Ah, I see. No, it's all good. Okay, so probably my first question is, well, let's imagine I work for a growing SaaS startup, and I mean, setting the right price is probably one of the easiest ways to increase your revenue because you don't have to attract a lot of traffic, you don't have to build new pages, you just change the number. But at the same time, it's one of the most complex decisions because you have to take so many factors into account. So my first question is, should price be primarily value driven, or are there any cases when it can be cost driven? Considering your experience in different examples.
Yeah, so where costs come into play, if I understand the question right, where costs come into play is really only to validate that whatever you're thinking to do is viable, makes business sense, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to base your pricing just on cost. Cost really should be just more of I understand my customer, I understand what my advantages are within the context of other alternatives as well as competitors, because an alternative isn't just competitors, it could be what they're doing today, or it could be something that maybe is not necessarily obvious sometimes when you're going to market against with respect to what you're competing against. Are you familiar with the book that Clayton Christensen recently put out? Because I know you mentioned Jobs to Be Done. So are you familiar with Competing Against Luck, the new book?
I haven't read his recent book. I read Alan Clement's book on Jobs to Be Done, comparing coffee and kale. I found that one quite useful.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, it's just if you travel or if you listen to audiobooks, the audiobook is good as well. So on Audible. So I know that you had mentioned Jobs to Be Done, and that is at the core of how I help companies really understand their customer and understand their market opportunity. There's so much I could tell you on the call. I'm just going to try to keep it brief. But with respect to understanding your opportunities for pricing and how that could possibly generate more revenue for you, there are a number of factors to take into consideration. But cost really should be only after you understand your options. Cost should only be then to come in and say, hey, does this actually financially make sense for us to pursue this particular price level or price point? Does that help?
Yeah, I see. So cost is primarily used as a validation tool, not as a tool for deciding a price. That makes sense.
Well, so for the most part, unless it's a perceived commodity, which I say perceived because in some industries, there's some things that most people just kind of consider a commodity. That's where costs will certainly come in and play a more significant factor. But for the most part, other than those types of industries, your customers don't really care what your costs are. They care about, what they're trying to accomplish, their goals, their challenges, and the obstacles in the way of them achieving what they're trying to achieve. So they aren't too concerned with what your costs are within the context of what you might be charging them or trying to get them to pay.
Are there any SaaS industries where you could consider product to be a commodity? Or is it more for more kind of traditional industries?
Well, in the SaaS industry, it's certainly over the last number of years, there's each market has become more saturated, right? And there's a lot more options for customers to choose from. And it's a lot more likely that a customer might be using something somewhat similar today. And that's all the more reason to understand not only your customers really well, but to also understand what your advantages are over alternatives and competitors. Because that's what's going to get people to basically choose and be willing to try out your solution and be willing to choose you because of the switching costs, right? Because they've already, perhaps when it comes to software, they may have already invested time in trying to implement and deploy a software solution. And so there's this perceived switching cost right now and real switching costs with possibly considering going a different direction, right?
Okay, I see. So in
Another
case...
thing to keep in mind, one of the things I always tell anybody that ever inquires into my services, one of the things I always try to get into the conversation is two things. But one is, one of the best ways to communicate value is to contrast life with and without your solution. And you'd be surprised at how many companies, and I mostly work with software and technology companies, but how many companies themselves haven't even just done that exercise amongst their leadership team and amongst their team to kind of just say, okay, this is what our customers' life probably is like now, what they're doing, or what it would be like if they're using this competitor's product. Now, this is what it would be like if they chose us, right? And just doing that internally can be so insightful to better understand really what your advantages are, and that can really help you make a value case that would justify either increasing your price or a new customer paying a higher price than maybe what you were thinking before. Most companies tend to devalue their solution, because especially early on, because they want to acquire that first customer, so they discount or they give it away for free, and they make these decisions that ultimately, it's one of the reasons why people reach out to me, is they've made these decisions in the past, and it's created challenges for them today and where they think they can go in the future. So, right.
I see.
Anyway, so one other thing that I just want to get, I don't know if you saw it in any of our interactions, but it's not the price that they don't like, but it's what they understand they are or are not getting for the price. So a lot of times people think they have a pricing problem. That's why they're not able to acquire or retain a customer. It's because of the price. But in many, many cases, they just aren't doing a very good job, or as well as they could, communicating the value. Communicating the value on the front end. I have a methodology I call the market value playbook. So one of those pillars is the value promise, right? So think of that as almost like your value proposition. But once they choose you to do a trial with you, or to choose, initially become your customer, what about the value fulfillment? Are you fulfilling those promises? Are you reinforcing what you said you were going to do and the difference that you would make? Are you reinforcing that in the customer experience, right? And that's where you start to get pricing pressures, because people don't start to see, or the decision makers aren't seeing the value. And therefore, when it comes time for renewal or whatever, there's this pressure around price. Do we really need this? David Cancel recently did a podcast, and there was a brief blog post, but it was mostly related to the podcast around just some of their pricing decisions, where they were kind of evaluating, because they got the invoice for Slack and they got the invoice for Trello. And so their team was actually kind of evaluating, should we go to the free plan or on Trello, or should we pay this, and should we pay it going forward? So it was just kind of interesting to hear them kind of evaluating their software solutions. They felt like Slack was worth it, but they felt like, well, Trello maybe, we aren't using it as much, and so we're going to go, kind of move to the free plan. So that may be insightful for you to just kind of listen to that as well.
I see. Thank you. So value discovery seems to be at the core of figuring out everything else. And you said that you use job to be done interviews. Because you work with large firms, I was wondering, because sometimes, and you kind of mentioned it, sometimes the decision maker isn't the one who is currently using the product. So how would you, in that case, conduct job to be done interviews if you don't necessarily have direct access to the person who will be in charge of the decision, who has the struggle?
Yeah, so can you frame that question a little bit more? I just want to make sure I understood what you were saying. So you say it one more time.
So for example, sure. So for example, if we consider CRM software, so probably sales managers would be the ones actually using it. But the person who would be making decision on whether to purchase it or not might be, for example, chief marketing officer, because she's responsible for sales partly, and she would be the one who wants to, get pride in her work and convince the CEO that they should purchase it.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying. Okay, so the key thing is a lot of times, and this is a good point. I mean, this is if you're writing an article, this might be something that may not be obvious to some individuals. So the focus of jobs to be done, right, or really understanding your customer. So you want to understand not only the buyer, but you want to also understand the user. And I'm not necessarily, there are reasons why you might do a more deliberate, in-depth, like persona type, exercise around really understanding different personas. But in simple terms, you don't have to go that deep, because most people do that and then they never reuse them. And so they just, unless you're going to maintain personas, don't, keep it simple. Don't spend weeks and months on a persona effort if you aren't going to actually maintain and continually validate those. So in simple terms, you have a buyer and you have a user. So on the front end, you just want to make sure you understand for different segments, is the buyer and the user the same? So in the example that you gave, the buyer and the user are, if I understood your question right, are different, right? And so when you're doing your jobs to be done effort and really understanding the user or the customer and the value that you deliver, don't just focus on the user. You also got to think about, well, what are the jobs that are important? What are the outcomes that the buyer cares about? So you got to make sure you extend that into understanding the buyer as well, so that that's part of the value case that you're making, and that you're enabling the user to more efficiently make that value case to the buyer as well inside their organization. So, does that help?
Yes. Is it easy to reach buyers like in enterprise firms? I'm just getting into more kind of tactics, I guess.
That's where sometimes if you're working primarily with startups and so forth, where people have maybe somewhat limited business experience, it can be more of an unknown, right? And a lot of uncertainty around what is that buyer. But somebody with some real just fundamental business knowledge can many times understand what buyers probably do care about. You know what I mean? And so the most common value drivers, especially in a B2B type business, is how would your solution help us generate more revenue, right? Make more money, increase sales, right? So how can you help us make more money? Another is, how can you help us save money? How can you reduce our costs? So you certainly want to at least start there at the very minimum and understand how your solution can do, and if it can do those. And the closer you can come to actually measuring that, right, and understanding that, you'll be in a much better place. I worked in the elevator industry, plus I've worked with industries that work with elevator companies and technology companies. But one thing the elevator industry did is, they have multiple floor buildings, and so it's kind of hard to kind of understand, just to get your head around what the investment might look like. So they picked kind of what the most common, right, the most likely, and so that was like a 10-floor building. And then they built up a value case around that kind of scenario. And that helped people to begin to associate and begin to understand that type of an investment better. And even if they had a 30-floor building or if they had a 5-floor building, you know what I mean? At least they had some sort of frame of reference to start from.
I see. So that in that case, that would be the frame of reference for someone higher up the firm. I see.
So within the context of how can you help us save money or help us make more money, find something that's kind of probably a common scenario, and make a value case around that. You don't have to know, but if you do know that particular customer, depending on your sales cycle and your approach to sales, right? Because you have to keep in mind your customer acquisition cost as well. So, but if you can, and that's one reason why if you come up with this common scenario, that can often serve your team very well in multiple scenarios, at least to begin to move people through that buyer's journey closer to making decisions.
I see. Another thing that I don't fully understand is, on the one hand, you do have to consider like all the alternatives that your customer has, so the full consideration set when setting your price and understanding what value your product can bring. But at the same time, how do you go about finding out the actual number? Because
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you can give a specific example, but an
There's a,
example where like this is the alternative, this is how much it costs, and based on this, we can find out that this are roughly the numbers that we could charge for our product.
yeah. So it comes down to those outcomes. So you referred to jobs to be done, which is becoming more and more common, and it's kind of making its way through business community, if you will, and so forth. And people are taking different approaches to it. I have something that's part of my methodology, and it's relatively in general the same type of idea, but I refer to it as JPGOs, and so it's jobs, gains, outcomes, and the key thing is outcomes are measurable. That's kind of what I was talking about, those value drivers. So how do you actually help us make money? How do you actually help us save money? How do you help us reduce cycle time? Those types of things. So, which ultimately reducing cycle time could translate to both making money and also saving money, depending on the nature. So, but once you understand those things, if you think through the jobs, the pains, the gains, the outcomes, and understand how you might measure those, then it puts you in the position to create these scenarios, these likely scenarios where you can actually put numbers to it. But then there's one more step that I think a lot of people miss. And Clayton Christensen's recent book kind of touches on it as well. I don't know if he's touched on it as much because it's pretty significant. It's what are the triggers for each of those? And the better you understand those triggers, the better you're in the position to make a case that's measurable, and that's going to put you down the path to figuring out what that number is. One story I heard from one of my clients serving financial institutions, right? And think of banks and so forth. And so it's not like there's any question around. It's easy to get a list of every potential customer they get out, right? Because it's known, right? All the banks. But they were going to pitch their software solution. It was their first early opportunity, and they had this conversation. This is what they told me. They had this conversation in the car on the way over there. It's like, well, what if they ask us how much? What are we going to say? And they were bouncing around these different prices, similar to your question, right? So what's the right number, right? And they were bouncing around, 25 annual subscription, 50, anyway, they decided to go into that. And if that conversation did go in that direction, that they were going to say that it's $1 million annual subscription. The bank didn't even, they were so convinced with the value and what they demoed and what they did when it came to the price, that was, you know what I mean? It was not a barrier to them still being interested in choosing that company to deploy that solution and to get the benefits that it would provide their business. So, similar to what I said, a lot of times people will talk themselves out. I'm actually in the process of writing a book, and it's around a concept that I've developed, and it's similar to the market value playbook methodology, but there's one aspect of it, and it's called the priced window. And you may have heard it, and there's a few mentions of it in different contexts perhaps, but can you picture just a square, right? Or similar to like a chart or a graph, right? So along the bottom, right, on the x-axis, right, you have low in the left-hand corner and high on the right-hand corner. And that's willingness to pay, okay? And then on the left-hand side, on the y-axis, you have low again at the bottom and high at the top. And here's where I'm going with this. That's ability to pay. Now, the more you understand your customer, and the better you understand those JPGOs, right, and those triggers, that's going to put you in the position to understand value in a much more intimate way, and you're going to be able to move people across that bottom right continuum towards increasing their willingness to pay. But the other aspect is, what about their ability to pay? What are they buying today already? What type of business, what size, what kind of investment can they actually make in different types of solutions? And that's where that bank scenario that I was just referring to, they have a high ability to pay. And they were able to generate with their software solution a high willingness to pay. And so that gives them this price window around where you might fall with your actual price. The better you understand the outcomes and the value you actually deliver can help you better understand where you can be with your actual price. And so many people, if you can draw a line, are you drawing this along with me? I can send you a
Yes, I've actually seen it in one of your blog posts.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
So along the bottom, though, that is in a sense where costs come in some regard. And that's kind of your price floor, right? And you draw that across the bottom. And those that don't have a reasonable or, a certain level around their ability to pay, they may have a high willingness to pay. They may really like where you're going and really want, but they don't have the ability to pay within the context of the value you deliver. So those are distractions, especially early on. You want to focus early on that top right. It's going to put you in the best position to not miss the full financial opportunity that you're creating and that you can deliver to the marketplace with the value that you're able to create. So
I see.
There's more to it, but that's where you can understand better where that price point is, and make sure you're not pricing too low. Go ahead. Any other questions?
Yeah, this reminds me of, I think you tweeted about this once, is that be careful with assessing product market fit, and you may not need to change your product, but rather change the market. So I'm wondering, how would you come to this understanding that this is not the right market for you? Like, what kind of research would you do to realize this?
Well, sometimes founders of different types of companies, they often have a certain frame of reference, and often it is their experience. And so unless they've had some level of experience or somebody challenges it, they often don't think outside of what they kind of know. So, for example, if you've worked in the elevator industry for years or whatever it may be, oftentimes they miss opportunities in other markets. And so that's where, talking to customers and just really trying to challenge yourself, is there something that we're missing? Are we limiting how we understand this value in some way? It really comes to just the leadership and being willing to challenge themselves to think differently. So that's one thing that somewhat separates me from some other people that do what I do is my breadth and depth of experience across different industries, B2B, B2C, different sizes of companies. I think that's one thing that sets me apart. That's one of my value advantages is because I help companies see things that they wouldn't necessarily see because they're so busy in the business that they've been doing and that they're doing. They often don't think outside of those kind of parameters, right? So I kind of help them, you might say, perhaps shift their paradigms in a way that they could possibly go years without any sort of, I guess, catalyst to doing so, right? If they just stay.
I see.
So I mean, there's more to it, but I guess you might say, if you're in a position where you're wondering if maybe it's the wrong market and you have the right product, then I mean it can be as simple as just looking through a number of different industries and starting to kind of understand, well, who is successful in those industries? What are they trying to likely accomplish, and how would our solution possibly make a difference, right? Those J, do they have jobs or pains? Are they looking for some specific gains that are really important to them? And what are the outcomes that ultimately they want? What is that, and how would they measure those? And how can your solution do something, to impact that?
What could be some of the right signals that this market is not right for you? Like, what are some of the signals that firm is not able to pay or not willing to pay.
That say the last part, that who is what?
Who is not unwilling to pay given your framework? Like, what are some of the signals to look for?
Yeah, well, some of the signals are you think about your business, right? Conversion and what your company is doing and the outcomes you're trying to create for your customers. And really it's that some of the signals are relatively straightforward. Do they follow up? Right? um, and so here's one thing that I recommend that companies do to help accelerate that process of kind of validation, especially and even during the sales process, is that you provide what the next steps are. So a lot of companies don't do that. So one thing that I do with my opportunities is in any interaction, my follow-up is I follow up, and in every interaction, I have a very simple bulleted list. It could be the next 2 to 5 next steps, right? Mm-hmm. And I usually put the first step as the call that we just had, and that's shown as done, right? And then I show the next step. So it already gives an impression that and reinforces the idea that we've already invested some time and we've completed one step. And here's what the next steps look like. And if you do that during your sales process, you do that during your onboarding process, you're going to put yourself in a much better position to pick up on those signals. So if you're working with early opportunities, I'm working with a Forbes, right? World's most innovative companies. That's why I'm in New Jersey, right? And they have 2 very early development partners for a new software analytics type solution, okay? But you know what they don't do, and they haven't done, and I've worked with this company before in another part of their company, they didn't do it either, is for these early development partners, they don't even have a deliberate, intentional kind of plan in which they intend to kind of try to move those early development partners through. So what they experienced in the past and what they're experiencing now is, the people have logins and they can use the software solution, but they aren't in a position to, number one, monitor. They aren't even using monitoring software that you and I likely know is very readily available, like Pendo and so forth. But on top of that, they don't even have a process in which they're saying, okay, we're going to onboard them here. It's a 3-week, early development partner program time frame. And during those 3 weeks, this is what it's going to look like. First, we're going to provide you with login and training. And by week 1, we're hoping that you would be able to do this. And we're going to have a follow-up, either survey or a phone call. You know what I mean? Just the progression. Mm-hmm. So being very deliberate in creating a hypothesis around what those JPGOs are and triggers, and then putting yourself in the position to prove those out, even during the sales process, is going to put you in the position to begin to fine-tune what those signals are. Because then you'll be able to begin to measure and say, hey, this is what seemed to happen. This one didn't, we weren't able to convert this one. Okay, so now we know what to look for in the future ones. And are we seeing the same things? Are we seeing different things? And that's going to, and so many people wait to possibly think about doing that when they formally launch, and they don't do it very early on. And therefore, they've really delayed a lot of learning and insights. Anyway, I think you see where I'm going with that.
I see. Can I ask you just the last one question? Because I see the slide overrunning. So I think...
So far, has it been...
Yeah,
is it helping
yeah, definitely. It definitely is helping. What I'm trying to understand is, probably you will still get to the right number once you test it. For example, you test it on the pricing page the same way as Ruben Garmes did with his pricing page for BidSketch. I'm just thinking, when we had the conversation, he told me that he didn't find that a lot of founders do actually test pricing. And I think one of the reasons why is probably because there is certain risk associated with changing your prices. Do you think it's actually risky, and how would you mitigate risk when testing prices?
Yeah, Yeah, so you probably read that blog post that Ruben posted about
Yes.
his experience, And so my recommendation actually to Ruben and my recommendation to almost all of my customers or potential customers is that you don't test the actual price point. The more often you want to test what is leading up to the pricing page, the value communication, and how you reinforce that value on the pricing page. And there's a lot of things you can do around testing the design and a number of different elements, if you will, right, that you would use sort of like Optimizely or Visual Website Optimizer and so forth to test. When it comes to actually testing a price point, he felt like at that stage that he could do that, and he had an understanding of his traffic and so forth, that he felt like the risk was pretty minimal, and so he proceeded to do that around actually testing a price point. So then the question is, it really depends on where you're at right now. So if you already have pricing out there, then testing pricing can be really risky. And again, it depends on the nature of your business and the type of traffic you're seeing, and whether or not you're going to kind of how you're set up to actually respond to it if you start to get some sort of negative, press or people start posting about it or something like that. So you got to be really prepared on how you're going to respond to those types of challenges if you do that. What I would suggest, though, is if you're really early on a startup company, similar to what I was saying before, is be relatively uncomfortable with how high priced you are. Because, again, most people will naturally tend to devalue their solution because they start talking themselves out of the value, or they don't know the value to the level that I'm describing, right? And so because that, they start to price too low. And that's setting them up for having significant challenges if they ever try to raise their prices. So with that said, if you already have a price and you think your pricing is too low, you have to be willing to increase your price and understand that you may lose some of those low-price customers, but you have to have a good reason to think that you can position yourself better for higher-priced customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So have a good reason why you come up with that hypothesis and be willing to execute well to validate that. It's always, but aside from that, start high. It's always going to be easier to lower your price. There's significant challenges if you ever try to raise your price. Now, with that said, one of the best ways to increase your price is one of the things that I help with is a tool, a part of my methodology is called the Value Offering Roadmap. And so when I help a company, I help them think of not only what their roadmap is, what their solution looks like today, but I want them to understand and think about where they're going, what their product roadmap looks like. And that can include services too that maybe they don't feel like they're available to provide now, but they think it might fit in the future. So understand what that roadmap might look like. So then as you release and can release new functionality or new capabilities or services, that you're putting yourself in a position to maybe create a new offering, right? And then try to move people to the more valuable offering, right? Because if you're going to raise your price, you should, if you really want to put yourself in a position to have it perform for you, is have a reason why people would pay more, right?
I see. Okay. So
you're familiar, or if you saw that price window, I don't know where you saw that, but in that price window, under the targets, I often encourage people just to, even if you don't end up going this route or you aren't in the position initially to offer, but think in the terms of a good, better, best. At least go through that process. And if you understand your roadmap, then that ability to pay on the left, right? Those with the lower ability to pay, or maybe they can only get an initial budget to this relatively new solution to their organization, and they aren't going to be able to buy your best option initially. So you want to have more of an entry, right? That good, and that's for that willingness to pay. I can send you a screenshot of that as well, just kind of what that might look like.
Yeah.
And so if you those different levels of ability to pay, that's where that good, better, best comes in, and it can set you up. And then when you add new functionality, you can almost add another one and then drop the previous good. and just kind of lose that price point, lose that offering as you continue to evolve as a solution and move and begin to make your roadmap a reality with regards to what you can offer the marketplace. That's one of the best ways to put yourself in a position to raise your price.
I see. But if you're already on a low price, you said don't test your price point, but test your value proposition. How would it work?
Well, but if you want to increase your revenue because you think your price too low, there's going to be some trade-offs, right? So there really are some. It depends on the nature, but say you're priced at $29 a month, right? And you think, wow, that's just priced too low, right? And I even get a lot of my clients say, our customers actually tell us they would pay us more, but we just haven't. We're so afraid what other customers might do. We just they are frozen in fear of doing anything. So, but if you understand your customer, you understand the value, and you're beginning to validate what that value looks like, then yeah, $29 probably was too low, and it probably is reinforcing what I said. You started way too low in the first place, but that doesn't mean you have to stay there. You make a good value case, and you communicate it well, and you can recraft perhaps even your pricing page to better communicate what it is they're getting, depending on what you've already done. And then it's just a decision around, hey, we're gonna move, and all sorts of examples on the internet, right? Of people raising their prices and significant pushback initially, and then it tends to go away over time. It's just, you got to make what's the best decision for you, and understand that if you're going to raise your price, you can lose some customers and stay revenue, somewhat constant. But it ultimately will set you up, depending on where you're at in the product life cycle and so forth, and in your go-to-market strategy. If you're in a position to really grow and maybe expand into other markets or other geo territories, then you're going to want to make those decisions because then as you expand and grow, those new customers are going to be paying that new higher price. You see what I'm saying? So there's a whole lot I can say about grandfathering too. A lot of people default grandfathering in existing customers, and they don't actually even attempt to make a value case why those existing customers would actually pay more. And from experience, they're missing significant revenue opportunities. So, and they're also so were you familiar with David Cancel?
No, I'm not.
Have you? Okay. So David Cancel, he's had a number of startups. So currently he's working with his company is Drift, DRIFT.com. Before that, he was at HubSpot. You've heard of HubSpot?
Sure.
Before that, he was a company was called Performable. So I worked with him briefly while he was leading his company, Performable. And one of his challenges was he wanted a low-touch customer acquisition, right, approach. He had been in kind of the corporate world, and he really wanted to. I don't recommend that you use this as an example in your story because I may not be telling it. He has all sorts of references to his past experience. I would go to some of his posts.
Sure.
But in general, what his challenges was that they were finding out that they were priced too low. And again, part of that was because they wanted the low touch, right? They just wanted to convert people on their website. But what they were getting was a high level of interest from agencies and large agencies and organizations, but they weren't choosing him. You want to know why? Because they were priced too low. They weren't used to paying. They were used to paying so much more, and so they in a sense, it questioned the credibility around what they were offering. It almost seemed too good to be true. You see what I'm saying? So we significantly raised their prices. That put them in a position to significantly more effectively and more efficiently acquire and close those deals, those larger deals, right? And then it was relatively short time after that when HubSpot got its first infusion of VC capital, their first acquisition was Performable, and that was key to the product roadmap for HubSpot, was the functionality and capabilities that Performable offered them. So, but that's just an example. It depends on what your business objectives are. really key to understand what your objectives are. If you're just trying to gain market share and possibly position yourself to be acquired, then that's a different set of parameters in which you're going to evaluate options and make decisions. If you're driving towards a certain level of profitability and maximizing what I refer to as your return on value, right? On the value you deliver, think about all the time and the dollars and the sweat and effort and the risk that these founders put into their solution. Why wouldn't you want to put yourself in the best position to get paid what you're worth, to get the best return on that value that you deliver to the customer? And in order to do that, you really need to understand those customers. And if you're not willing to do that, then there's a good chance you'll price too low, you won't get paid what you're worth, and you have to acquire a lot more customers for a lot lower margins, and you're not anywhere near where you could have been. So.
I see. Would it be a viable strategy, though, to test for new customers? So leave the same prices, the same way as Ruben did, and then just test your pricing on new customers without changing anything for existing customers in the first place? Because it feels like it gives you some primary data to then see, okay, so the new customers actually respond well to high prices, and then we can build the business case for our existing customers.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on the nature of your business, right? And it also depends on your how you're trying to acquire customers, right? So if you're just trying to, are you thinking kind of within the context of the services that you provide, and in many cases, people have a certain level of traffic that they're likely able to generate? Is that what is that kind of how you're going to post?
What do you mean exactly? Could you repeat that, please?
Well, so you're referring to kind of your last comment in question was kind of around pricing, testing pricing. And what I'm saying is I typically wouldn't recommend many companies test actual price points. It's more understanding the value. And if you're saying a test is that you go and your next opportunity, right? Because I think you're referring to, in many cases, people have a pricing page and you're trying to convert people on your website. Is that correct?
Yes. You're getting me correctly, yeah.
Okay. So if we're talking about converting people on websites, right, because you have your pricing available and they can simply make the purchase, when it comes to testing your prices, right, it's really tricky. I mean, because again, depending on the technology you're using and just some of the realities around the technology that is available, a particular person, right, prospect may see one price, and either they or somebody else they know, right, or interact with, they may see a different price. And so what would that be? And so it's just simply thinking through those scenarios and then having a response. And that'll, depending on how you respond to what those likely responses are, that'll help guide your decision around whether it makes sense to test your pricing. Because if you're thinking about raising your prices, how much are you going to raise your price, right? So say you're going from $29 a month to $39 a month, right? Well, for a lot of those types of customers, that will, in certain types of individuals, and some of them are very willing to post negative things, they may think that's a significant, and how could you possibly, raise your price? Or they could be, well, why is he seeing a lower price than me? What's going on here? There's a lot of challenges. What I would focus more on is, if you think your price is low, really understand the value, understand who your likely customers are, and then make sure that you're making decisions based on that, rather than maybe just messing around with your price point, and then just seeing. I mean, it's tempting to do that, right? Mm-hmm. It's tempting to just mess with the price point and just kind of see what performs better, but that's not really going to help you ultimately make better informed decisions. It can aid your decision, but I think there's too many challenges, and it's really avoiding what a business should be helping with. That's understanding their customer. your competitive advantages. You may have seen me post this too, but knowing your customers better than anybody else, that should be one of your competitive advantages. And if it's not one of your goals to know your customer better than anybody else, then you really got to ask yourself what you're really trying to do. I mean, are you just trying to create a software solution and possibly position it to acquire some customers and then get acquired yourself? Is that, or are you really trying to make a difference in the lives and in the businesses of the customers?
I see. I see. So in some cases,
so that may not be, yeah. So my responses may seemingly not be as relevant to the SaaS world that is really kind of just looking to create some sort of new artificial intelligence bot or something like that, and they think that they can price it relatively low and then put it out there, and then, oh, hey, you know what, maybe people would actually pay more for this. So what do we do? Okay, well, let's test out just on our website putting a higher price. Well, yeah, you can do that. And I'm not saying that you can't do that, but I would be focusing on other things. And first, before you start messing with the actual price point. But when you come to a conclusion that you may, in fact, be priced too low, then it's making the decision and saying, hey, we were able to acquire 1,000 early customers that are paying $29. If we raise our price, there's a certain percentage of them that are likely going to, for whatever reason, say they can't pay or won't pay. And you just got to understand kind of a high, medium, low scenario is a good way to start. What would that look like, right? If 30% went away, right? But 70% stayed and they're paying a higher price, right? So a lot of people aren't willing to do that simple math and think through those scenarios. Because ultimately, if they do that, what they might find, instead of going from 29 to 39, that, you know what, we only thought about going from 29 to 39 because we were afraid of what people might do. But we understand our customer much, we could actually make a case for them paying $99 a month. And now if we actually look at the math, you know what, if we lost 40% of our customers, but we got 60% of them paying $99 a month because they're probably a better fit and they place and associate more value on what we deliver, that's actually a better position to be in, right? Mm-hmm. Not only now, but then as we acquire new customers, right, we've just significantly increased the whole financial outlook for our business, as well as the cost structure of our business, because, again, it's much more easier to support, much more efficient to support fewer customers at a higher price, right? So,
sure, I see.
And that's where the pricing, again, is going to make a significant impact on so many areas of your business, because pricing impacts every area of any business. It impacts how much money you have to go out and try to fundraise from VCs or angels and so forth. Or it impacts how much you have to put in of your own money or your friends or family money, right? Those pricing decisions are going to determine your burn rate, the lifetime value of your customers. It's going to determine how much money you're able to invest in getting the right talent so that you can bring on the right people, investing in innovation to stay relevant in the marketplace. It's so important. Anyway.
I've seen that reminder page. That's really powerful.
The what page?
The reminder whiteboard on your Twitter account.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Okay, I see.
So what would be something that we didn't talk about, just looking at the time, that maybe I didn't share with you what you were hoping to get, but I guess last chance here, is there something I can possibly answer that would be helpful to you?
Yeah, thank you. Probably just one last thing is, again, about understanding your value. So you talked about outcomes, and this is something that we can measure. I also think that
I'm sorry, I thought I didn't understand what you said, but you said outcomes. Go ahead, keep going.
But another thing that determines value, as far as I understand it, is opportunity cost. And this is where you really need to understand what is the consideration set of your customer. So, for example, if we take heat mapping, then on the one hand, the opportunity cost is to use expensive technologies like eye tracking, user testing, and on the other hand, there are newcomers in the industry. So you have direct competitors such as, I don't know, kind of lower priced heat mapping solutions that are just following you as a market leader. So it seems like on the one hand, yes, there are more expensive technologies and you can, well, set your price based on this opportunity cost. But then on the other hand, there are these direct competitors that are offering a lower price, and because they are copying your product, it's probably quite similar to what you offer. So in that case, the question is, how do you set your price? Because on the one hand, yes, like you compare yourself to expensive technologies, but the new competitors, direct competitors, are coming in. So what?
Yeah. So that's where. Go ahead, finish your question.
I mean, yeah, I just wanted to summarize it. Like, what is your decision making in that case?
Yeah, so it comes down to understanding again your advantages. And one thing that is really important with my engagements when it comes to understanding what your advantages are, right, is being really honest with yourself. And oftentimes when I try to get, just what are your top 3 advantages just to get started, because otherwise sometimes it's hard for them to even get started because it's like, oh, well, there's so many. Well, what are the top 3 or what are the top 2? Let's start there. And oftentimes what they say are their advantages really aren't advantages. They're more strengths. And so it's important to understand the difference between a strength that somebody else could have with regards to the value they can deliver, right? When you're talking about maybe eye tracking or some of these technologies, and what is actually an advantage. And then along with that, if you do have a significant advantage or an advantage over somebody else, the next question is, how sustainable is that advantage? Because a lot of times people think, and this is kind of, I think, the scenario that you're kind of describing, is that advantage is sustainable somewhat. They either don't think about it or they just kind of assume, maybe not in these terms, but it's a perpetual advantage. It's like they're going to have that advantage forever. But the reality is, unless they have some sort of, IP, intellectual property rights, or, some sort of, you see where I'm going with that, then it's just a matter of time until somebody else can match what you are delivering. So then once you understand your advantages, that's what I'm saying, that you have to understand how sustainable it is. And one way I help people do that is just kind of going through the process and just asking yourself, well, if this is your advantage today, how long would it take somebody else to match what you're doing? So if if it's some sort of, we'll just say XYZ technology, and you've come out with it first, you've invested the time, and you've come up with the way, can you defend it in some way with some sort of patent or something like that? And if you can, then you just need to be realistic with how sustainable it is. And so if you think, well, somebody else could probably possibly match us, but it would probably take, best case scenario, this company with VC funding and so forth, it would probably still take them 2 years, then you just need to understand that reality. You want to make the most of that window, if you will, to leverage those advantages. But then with that, you're going to want to continually be looking for ways you can continue to innovate. Now, the only way that, other than some sort of patent or something like that, or something that's really, really costly for somebody to try to replicate, the only other thing that is really no way people can replicate is the people in your business. So the people that you're able to attract and keep as far as your talent. And a lot of times companies don't leverage that as well. So I work with some companies in the IoT space, and some of them have data scientists on staff. Well, sometimes there's actually some value in the actual personalities of those data scientists, or how they frame those data scientists and what they can deliver to those customers. And a lot of times people don't leverage that. So that's just, I kind of went in a couple different areas kind of answering that question. But
no, but that's really insightful. Thank you.
It is a challenge, though, with any type of new software solution. I'm sure you've heard all sorts of stories, or perhaps you have or haven't, of companies just doing that. That somebody comes out with a certain. You think about what Trello did, and here's an example. Are you familiar with a company called Pipedrive?
No. But...
Pipedrive is a software solution. They've been around for a while now. It's a sales.
Sure. Yeah. I do know about Pipedrive.
I think they're based out of Estonia.
Yes, I do know about them. Mm-hmm.
But they've got VC funding and so forth. But one of the things I was seeing and hearing in the space when they first launched is, are you familiar with the Trello-like approach to their sales pipeline? And you can drag. Are you familiar with that Kanban type view of Trello?
No.
Yes. Oh, you're not? Oh, okay. But anyway, they incorporated that into their sales software, and it made it so easy. And so one of their early abilities to acquire early customers was people that had invested in Salesforce. And because a lot of people don't actually implement and deploy Salesforce very well, and a lot of times people that invest in Salesforce, they don't actually use very much of it because for whatever reason, So people were actually migrating and moving, not necessarily large companies, but a lot of these mid-small companies were starting to move to Salesforce because of how easy they made it. But then, what happened? Other sales solutions, such as maybe Nimble, I don't know if you've heard of that, and other solutions, even Salesforce themselves, have started to use that Kanban view because of how easy it was perceived by salespeople to use the software. Other people started adding that type of functionality. So again, they had an advantage for a while. It helped them very early on to differentiate themselves. But then other people, unless you have some sort of way to protect and defend that, other people are likely going to copy it, and it's just a matter of time. So that's why you always have to be thinking about where you're going with the solution. What's that roadmap? How are you going to continue to be relevant in the marketplace? And that's what we're starting to see now in this software space. It's so easy, relatively speaking, to begin a software company, and everything is so transparent that it is really easy for software companies to copy. But some companies copy just a certain part because just that aspect of a larger solution can be a standalone solution. And so anyway, the market's becoming saturated, becoming more and more difficult to differentiate yourself. But that's all the more reason to understand your customer and your advantages. So, because ultimately that's going to put you in a position to better understand where you can go with your pricing and to help you rethink your pricing. And in many cases, like I've said before, many people are often priced too low. So.
I see. Well, I think the time...
Did you see my other post? It's been a while since I posted this, but one post I had is, if you think about it, many companies, many people spend more for a pizza each week than they pay for a lot of these software solutions each month. They deliver way more value than a pizza. Can't they make a case for being more valuable than a pizza? Anyway, it's just one way to frame it and think about it.
Yeah. That's a good way to close it.
Right, well, it's good talking to you. Hopefully this is helpful.
No, that was incredibly. Thank you, Chris.
Want me to send you anything? All right. Have a great day.
Yes, you too. Afternoon. Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.